it's weird for me to think about you as someone, obviously I'm younger than you, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still, I think of Jim Crow as so long ago. And my parents
Right.
obviously lived through that too, although as, white people very differently.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard for me to remember that you guys lived through that time period, that
Oh
you
yeah. Yeah, I
experienced
imagine
it. Like, I
so.
think of you as not being from that. How could that have happened? It's like there's
Right.
just this disconnect.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I can see that. I mean, and look, in some ways it was, well, shit, not in some ways, it was a long time ago, right? I mean, but I've said this before, but the social order wasn't fully consolidated until really like the first decade of the 20th century, and its back was broken by the mid 1960s. But the mid 1960s was a long time ago, right?
yeah.
And I think I mentioned this in the book too. But my younger cousins who were, you know, um, between 9 and 15 years, my junior, or 9 and 13 years, my junior, or maybe 15. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, didn't have that same experience because by the time that they were conscious, right, of the world outside the household, the petty apartheid had been pretty much ended, right?
Hmm.
Um, um, the the Jim Crow takeout windows and explicit racial restrictions were gone. That's not to say racism was gone,
Right.
right? But or or injustice or inequality was gone. But as that's another point about it. I mean, it's not the social order was defined by hierarchy. The whole point of it was a hierarchy, and the point of it was a racial hierarchy. It was also a class hierarchy because the whole right what the system took shape after the defeat of the populist insurgency in the 1890s, and began with disfranchisement. And as J. Morgan Cowser's work has shown, uh, the vast majority of the black population was disfranchised, but depending on where you were, up to a quarter or more of the white population was also disfranchised. Because and by the way, this is the point that I'd like to make. It might seem kind of pedantic or worse, about the way that we talk about current the Republican moves at voter suppression. It's easy. It's a natural. I just saw that what AOC just did this, a few days ago, and 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 Ellie Mistel does it all the time anyway. Um, but the but the tendency is to compare what's happening now to the Jim Crow, or to disfranchisement in the Jim Crow order. And I know it makes people feel righteous to do that. And on one level, yes, it is the same thing, right? They're trying. There's a movement that's targeting minority voters, and black voters in particular, to suppress the vote. But it's not just because they're black or non-white. That what that makes for a convenient rallying call, right? Um, like especially what all the stuff about fraud in the 2020 election. I mean, you could see not very far beneath the surface that there didn't have to be real, um, identifiable fraud, because in the minds of a lot of right wingers, those people, and that means blacks and Hispanics and Democrats and liberals and leftists and gays and trans and whatever, uh, aren't real Americans. So any votes that they cast are by definition fraudulent, right? But but the deeper story is that the point of disfranchisement is to undermine the left, basically, right? And that's what it was in 1890s also, right? Right. So it's not just, yeah. I mean, as you move down like the pyramid of attentiveness, right, on the right wing, more to sort of casual shock troops, as it were, dangerous though they may be. A lot of them certainly get pumped at the idea that only people like them, are, like themselves, are real Americans, and only people like themselves should vote. But the point isn't the bigotry, right? The point is that the authoritarian and or fascist forces that are pushing, funding, fueling, driving all this have a reactionary political economic agenda that wants to tighten capitalist class power, right? And frankly, not only does the "just like Jim Crow" line not help us see that clearly, but frankly, I'm not sure what it's supposed to do, right? I mean, is comparing it to disfranchisement at the end of the 19th century supposed to rally good-hearted people to combat the bad people? Is it supposed to change people's minds? I mean, it just seems to me like so much that passes for progressive politics these days. That narrative is about making the people who propound the narrative feel, as I said, righteous and
right, good
about themselves. But it doesn't really do us any good. And this is such a perilous moment in the society. It's especially frustrating, to see people not taking the stakes to heart, basically. If there's something specific to this political moment that I hope that the book might help to do, is to help people to see that there's more going on than just the bad old days or the old-timey times when benighted ideas reigned, and that there was a social order that was rooted in class power, and that's what the point of that was ultimately, and that's the same thing we're fighting now.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what would it look like for people to respond appropriately to this, or to take the stakes seriously? Like you're saying that they're not. So what would it look like? What would the AOCs or LA Mistal's be doing or writing or saying?
Well, one thing that they would be doing or writing or saying is that, this is like, don't fool yourself about what this is. Like, the ultimate point here is destruction of democracy, and a pursuit of authoritarian rule, and disfranchising or the voter suppression is certainly an important weapon in the arsenal, but the suppression of the groups who are being stigmatized is kind of like the lost leader, right? Or it's a scapegoat, right? It's and I think taking the next step, right? So look, I mean, I've written elsewhere about this. Like, there's a lot of people seem to find something powerful in the trope that such and such is just like Jim Crow or just like slavery, or shows that nothing has changed, when the manifest reality as you walk around in the world is that obviously a lot has changed. And one of the reasons that narrative flies is that, as you were saying a few minutes ago, so many younger people don't have any sense of what the social orders were like in the past anyway, right? Like, from all my years teaching, and my son has the same experience. Like, I mean, most people think there was this horrible thing called slavery, and then there was this horrible thing called Jim Crow, and they're kind of a mush together. And then something happened at some point in the 60s, right? I mean, like what used to be on the Martin Luther King birthday celebrations all over the country. Like, the local news reporter would go out to a middle school or high school and ask kids what they knew about Martin Luther King, and you get some version of, well, a long time ago people didn't have any freedom, and then Martin Luther King came and they got free, right? And nobody knows what any of that meant. Well, to the extent that that's the way that we understand the history, then people aren't prepared to see political forces and deep social structures operating, right? And that's what we really desperately need to cultivate to try to turn this thing around. I mean, and the more we think about good people and bad people, and who has the right ideas, and who has, but I mean, the wrong ideas, and how we need to compensate, for harms in the past or whatever. The less capable we are of confronting the monster that is really coming right down the road at us.